Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this very interesting, very dark little knife, the CKF Ratata, something along those lines. Ratata, I don't know. Either way, I want to thank my buddy Jim for sending this little knife along, because honestly it wasn't one that was on my radar, but he picked it up for EDC, loved it, and I'm glad I got a chance to check it out. Let's do a little size comparison for you first. Right here is, let's see here, got a lot of knives on the table. Spyderco PM2. So you can see the blade is actually surprisingly large on this guy. Here is your Ontario Rat number 1, which is sizably bigger than the sizably? I guess all bigness comparisons are sizable, right? Either way, it's big. Rat number 2 here, so not a small knife. Chris Reeve knives, large Shabazz 21 in single blade. So you can see blade length-wise, they're in the same department, although actually the Ratata is pretty compact on this dimension at least. So that's good. And, what the heck, it's on my table, Benchmade Anthem. So, there you go. That's the size of it. Then, finally, I want to comment. This guy is designed by Alexei Konagin. I'm sure I just butchered his name. Sorry about that, Alexei. But, nonetheless, very, very interesting. And, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this particular knife. So on the good side, first off, I like the name. It's very interesting. It's very different, very unique. I gotta say, Ratata was not my favorite Pokemon, but it does give me hope that if you use this knife enough, it will evolve into the CKF Ratata, which I think is a cool name. So there you go. That's good to know. Next thing, this knife has an all-over sort of black wash, and I gotta say it is fairly uniform across the blade and the scales themselves. So that's nice. I mean, look, nice. I don't tend to be a fan of black wash, but this is at least well done. And my reason is that it's been given sort of a stonewash pattern, like they did a black wash and then they stonewashed on top of it. And that makes this knife a lot more interesting than a knife where it is just sort of all black, all DLC. Just complete blackout. So that makes this a lot more interesting as a result. And I gotta say, this stonewashy sort of thing it reinforces the look of this knife. I don't actually know what this knife looks like. It's sort of got a biomechanical thing, maybe a rock thing, as in like a freaking chunk of stone, not like rock and roll. Yeah. It's whatever it is, it reinforces it. I think it's in line, so that's good. Next thing, the clip on this guy is beautiful. It is a Damascus sort of clip. It's very pretty, 100%. We'll come back to that clip later, but it is a very pretty clip. I cannot fault it there, and it's a nice touch of color on a knife that is otherwise kind of all black. So that's good. Next thing, the blade-to-handle ratio on this guy is actually quite good. I mean, you can see here that the blade is pretty much, obviously it's entirely within the handle, but there's not a whole lot of handle that's not containing blade here. And so, size-wise, it's not that out of control, even though the blade is rather large. That's good. Next thing, this knife is skeletonized like crazy. And I mean, part of it is like, yeah, there's a big hole in the freaking handle. Yeah, that's skeletonization. But even inside there, they could have just rested on their laurels. But even inside there, if you watch my disassembly, you'll see that all of these little pockets here are milled out on the inside, which reduces the weight further. Yet, I have to say, the balance on the knife is still pretty good. It balances right about here. And so that's impressive. It means that not only did they do a lot of work to reduce the weight on this knife, and it does weigh a lot less than you'd think it would. For instance, comes in at 4.2 ounces, but they did that work consciously and maintained a good balance, and that's nice. So I gotta give them credit there. Next thing, the blade on this guy is relatively slicey. You get yourself a nice sharpening choil here, which allows you to get the whole knife sharp, and they're using relatively thin blade stock. I mean, at its thickest point here, this blade looks to be maybe a little thinner than your Spyderco Sleesh Bowie. Where's my Delica? Oh, God, I didn't do a size comparison with the Delica. That's a sin. Here, right here, guys. I have solved my problems here. But anyways, it is a little bit thicker than the Delica, but not by far. And I think it's... Yeah, it's way thinner than the PM2. So either way, I mean, this is not a super thick blade stock. And the blade also being relatively tall helps it to be a better slicer. And overall, I mean, it's a little thickish behind the edge, but it is still a very nice tool for actually cutting things, at least on this area here with that part of the grind. And then the steel on it is, as you can see here, M390, which is a great steel, 100%. There's not much to complain about with M390. So that's great. On the good side as well, the fit and finish on this guy is overall pretty nice. The centering isn't quite right on, but otherwise, look, I mean, everything goes together fairly well, and nice stop pin arrangement. You can see the stop pin out here. I mean, overall, it's a nice looking knife. They've done a good job. Ergonomically, actually, it's surprisingly good. The ergonomics are weird here, 100%. It feels not a lot like any other knife I've tried because they handle very tactily narrows, but the thing is, it's curved in all the right places. You get some thumb ramp here. I feel like this does lock into my hand relatively well, and I do have smaller hands than most, so there you go. And then finally, I gotta say, the flipper tab on this brings me some joy. Look at this little tiny flipper tab. It's like a little baby flipper. The thing is, it works beautifully, and so this is about as far from a pocket pecker sort of huge flipper tab as you can get, and I appreciate that so much. And so to me, that is the last element of really good here, is that low-profile flipper tab. It disappears when it's open, and it's barely there when it's closed. So that's the good to me. The low profile, wow, hey, profile flipper tab, nice ergos, good fit and finish, slicey blade, good skeletonization, solid blade to handle ratio, beautiful clip, which show it off. Interesting black wash, and of course it is named after a Pokemon, so who can argue with that, right? Let's talk about what's great here. To me, 100% what's great about this particular knife is the action. A great action in a knife, there are many elements to it. I mean, at some level, reliability is the chief one. But once you get past a knife that will reliably flip open, then you get into really sort of minutia, if you will. You get into the really nitty-gritty of life. And this knife really nails the nitty-gritty of the action. And the detent is really what does it for me. If I pop this open, it sounds great. Like it feels great. It's a clean detent. It's a beautiful detent. The detent is, up there in terms of that clickitude, that sort of just clean crack. As you get on something like your Grimsmo Norseman or your Thorburns, that kind of thing. I'm not saying this action is as good on the closing as those sorts of knives, but it is a stellar detent. They have nailed the detent 100%. On the closing action, I mean, it is still reasonably false shutty, so I can't really argue with it there, but the thing is, overall, the action on this knife is great, and I found myself, as I was holding it, just idly flipping it because it's just great in that way. So to me, that's the great. Oh, it's running on ceramic bearings, by the way, which is probably why it's so damn false shutty. But that to me is the great, is the action is not only good and reliable, but it sounds and it feels really great. So they nailed it. Let's talk about what's bad, because they didn't nail everything. Okay, so on the bad side, first off, I don't love the compound grind here. It's not that there's a problem with it, and for some people it may be like, wow, cool, but I've found in my personal experience that compound grinds are a lot like vomiting, in that they are intellectually absolutely fascinating. Like, wow, cool, look at that, and they are certainly the solution to a very small set of problems, but in general, it's still something I'd rather not have happen to me on a regular basis. You may disagree, but at least that's my opinion here, and this reinforces it. There's not too much coming out of the compound grind functionally, and so it's just sort of a thing that's there. Next thing, the blade on this guy is pretty much all belly. That's not going to be a problem for a lot of people, much like the compound grind, but it is something that bugs me a little bit. I tend to like a little bit of flat in my blades, but this could be good for food prep as a result, although this isn't quite a food preppy sort of knife. Whatever. Next thing, blade on this guy is coming in at 3.6 inches here. I'll see if I can overlay my little ruler. And so, 3.6, it could even be 3.75 depending on how you measuring and how much the cop dislikes you. But whatever it is, this is a blade that is bigger than the legal line in a lot of places in the States, which is 3.5 inches, but not functionally so. It's not meaningfully better than a 3.5-inch blade. So those always strike me as a little bit of a, I don't know, like, couldn't you have either stopped or kept going? It's like a weird uncanny valley thing. Next thing, all of those things have been nitpicks. Let's talk about some real issues. First off, this guy is wide in the pocket. If you look at another knife that is, well, not wide in the pocket, like, for instance, your Benchmade Anthem, you can see here that this is, well, a lot more subtle. It helps, you're going to have less competition as you're trying to slide your hand by in order to grab whatever else is in your pocket. With it being this wide, that can be a bit of an issue. It helps that the clip is canted in this way, so it kind of hides part of the knife, and the lack of pocket pecker is helpful here too, but still. So, oh God, that detent is great. Anyways, still there. Next thing, the geometry on the, I'm sorry. Next thing is the lack of a detent ball ramp. This is normally a nitpick, but on this knife it isn't so much. The reason for that is, if you look at this knife, there is really only one place to grip this knife as you're closing it, and that is on the lock bar, which means that you're going to have a little bit more lock bar tension than usual as you're trying to shut this knife. And unfortunately, this knife does not have a detent ball ramp, and so getting the blade closed requires a little bit of extra doing, and that's just not stellar. I don't like that very much, and so I really think that this knife, most knives could benefit from a detent ball ramp, but this one needs it. That's a miss here. And speaking of that little bit of geometry, as I'm doing these crazy nitpicks, this is an issue that has bugged me with a few other knives before, but basically, by the time that the detent ball is up onto the blade, the flipper tab has already disappeared. This seems like a crazy nitpick, but the thing is, it's kind of not. If you close and open frame locks in the way I do, when you close your frame lock, what you want to do is put your thumb right here, so it disengages that, and then push the blade here, so that your thumb is stopping the blade from going any further, but now the detent ball is up on there. At that point, you can just let the knife fall shut, or at least close it the rest of the way. But on this knife, you can't do that, because in order to have your thumb here, you can't have the detent ball up on the blade, because in order for that to happen, the flipper tab's gone. So you're kind of in this weird position where you're trying to close this knife with an exceptionally strong detent ball, because of the detent, I don't even know how to put it, but with an exceptionally large amount of force required to get the ball onto the blade, and you're not allowed to have your thumb there for safety because the flipper... Look, these are things that nobody but me is probably ever going to think about these, but they drive me a little bit batty, because, I don't know. So the whole thing, the lack of detent ramp, which is itself not a big deal, and make the closing of this knife a little bit more dangerous than I think it needs to be if you're doing this sort of an approach, and it just makes it a little more frustrating. So those little things can add up as you're doing a knife. But what do I know? Next thing, the screws on this guy. These are not proprietary. These are just slot screws, and you can just use a regular sort of slot driver. But the problem is they are DLC-coated screws, and that means that it's very easy with a slot driver, which can slide around back and forth in there. Here, I'll not use a hardened metal piece, and to scratch up the DLC in there. And so as you saw in my disassembly, I actually used a piece of cloth wrapped around that in order to avoid injuring that. Or you can use a plastic, sort of firm plastic tool, like a spudger or something like that, to get up in there. But the thing is, I'm not a big fan of these off-centered DLC-coated slot screws. Is it a huge deal? No, but at least make them non-DLC, or at least center the slots, because that's a whole other affair. Off-center slots, I don't know, whatever. And then finally, on the bad side, this is no longer available. CKF, unfortunately, their pattern is to make a given model for like 20 minutes, then move on to making 5 other models. I get it at some level, but at another level, it's frustrating, both as a reviewer and as a human. By the time you figure out that this knife exists, you may not be able to get one anymore. And so that's the case with this guy. You can get him on the secondary pretty readily, but you're going to pay a little bit of a price for it. The retail was $375, by the way, which I think is a price that's fine. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's fine. But anyway, so that's the bad, is that it's no longer available. It's got these off-centered DLC screws that are kind of a pain in the neck to work with because of that. The geometry is weird with the flipper tab, and also it needs a detent ball ramp, and those two things add up to an experience that's not incredible. It's very wide in the pocket. The blade is all belly. It's 3.6 inches, which isn't a great size. And then the compound grind here, at least to my taste, is not to my taste. It's kind of redundant. On the ugly side is this little clip here. The clip on this guy is Damascus, and unfortunately Damascus clips tend to be a little bit stiff. They don't tend to have great spring, and this is no exception. And the other thing is that this clip is very, it's not very tall. There's not a lot of space underneath the clip. Compared to another knife like this Booz Blades Arrow that happens to be on my table here, you can see there's not much room for your pocket. And so practically speaking, even wearing relatively thin summery pants, this guy does not fall all the way down onto your pocket. My pocket usually stopped about here, which makes the knife shallower in carry, and it just, overall, it doesn't make the knife a joy to get into and out of your pocket. There's not much ramp. It's just, it's not that impressive in that way. And so this clip honestly drove me a little bit nuts. And so that to me is the ugly, is that this clip needs to be taller and it needs to have a little more spring, although that's hard to do with Damascus. Let's go into your final conclusion here. Look, final conclusions. This is honestly, I feel like I was maybe a little nitpicky on this knife. Maybe a little bit. Okay, let's be real here. I'm always nitpicky, but this one maybe suffered the brunt of it a little more than usual because, practically speaking, this is a very nice knife. It's got some annoying issues, 100%. The clip is a triumph of style over substance, and the tent ball thing, that whole thing adds up to a less than pleasant experience for me, but the thing is, at a very real level, this is a nice knife. And it's a CKF, and I probably could have predicted that. I feel like my CKF reviews all end up sounding a little bit the same, in that they've got a very nice action, although this one is exceptional in terms of that detent. Holy crap, that detent. It's got nice materials, nice machining, and a price that's good. It's not great, but it's not bad either. And then, unfortunately, like a CKF, it's made for 10 minutes and then discontinue. So, the knife is fine. And if you're looking at this guy in a trade, or if you're looking at old stock someplace, you're thinking of buying one on the used market. If you like the look, and if you wear thin pants, so this clip isn't a big problem, and you want an action like this, and I hope they all have an action like that, then you're probably going to love this knife. Don't let me scare you away from it too much. There's a lot more good than bad here. But, I'm the Nick, so I guess I have to nitpick a little bit. So that's the CKF Ratata. I can't vouch for what its evolved form is going to look like, but, yeah. Anyways, nice knife, and good job, CKF. Sure wish you was still making them. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.